Listado ang isang Chinese na umunoy espiya dito sa ating bansa. Target daw niyang libutin ang buong Luzon, Visayas at Mindanao. 5 taon na umanong minaman-mana ng sospek ang ating mga airport, pantalan, pati na ang mga shopping malls at opisina, gayon din ang mga EDCA site. Bukod sa Chinese spy, nahuli rin ang 2 kasabwat umano nitong mga Pilipino. At base sa report, isang malaking opisyal umano ng bansa ang nasa likod nito na nasa pwesto pa umano ng gobyerno. Narito ang buong detalye. Ngunit bago tayo magpatuloy, huwag kalimutang i-like, share, subscribe, and click the notification bell for more updates and for more upcoming videos. Maraming salamat! Nahuli ng National Bureau of Investigation ang Chinese na nag-i-espiya umano sa ilang instruktura sa bansa. Nitong December para umano, nakatanggap ng intel ang mga otoridad kaugnay sa grupo ng mga Chinese na nagmamanman sa bansa. Nasabat ng NBI mula sa suspect ang sasakyan kung saan nakakabit ang transmission system, lighter sensor at satellite navigation system. Ito raw ang ginamit para makuha ang mahahalagang datos gaya ng mga kinalalagyan ng mga base militar, Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement o EDCA site at mga kampo ng mga pulis. Tinitiktikan din daw ng grupo maging ang mga planta ng kuryente, mga opisina ng LGU, shopping malls, paliparan at mga pantalan. Ang masaklap, hindi patukoy kung saan direkta ipinadala ang mga nakuhang datos. Isang technical software engineer ang suspect at 5 taon nang naninirahan sa Pilipinas at kasal sa kanyang asawang Pilipina. Inaalam pa kung konektado siya sa Chinese People's Liberation Army, lalo't nagtapos siya sa isang universidad na pinangasiwaan ng PLA sa Nanjing, China. Mayroon din daw grupo ng Chinese na nagsisilbing financier ng suspect para magawa ang pag-espiya. Ayon pa sa AFP, delikado umano kung mapunta sa maling kamay ang mga nakuhang datos. Posible raw kasi itong magamit para matarget ang mga mahahalagang infrastruktura sa bansa. Posible rin daw na naipadala na ang mga datos na nakuha dahil may remote capability ang transmission system ng Chinese na suspect. Matatandaan na bago nito may nauna ng naarestong Chinese na nag-i-espiya rin. Inaalam din kung sangkot ang suspect sa Chinese-made submersible drone na nakita sa Masbate. Bukod sa suspect, 2 kasabwat niyang Pinoy ang inaresto at umaming inutusan silang mag-ikot sa iba't ibang lugar gamit ang mga nakumpiskang equipment. Ayon sa naging komento ng sambayan ng Pilipino, iisa lamang ang kanilang naging sigaw, Duterte Legacy. Mula raw kasi kay Alice Go, partikular na ang mga iligal na pogo ay konektado ang nakaraang administrasyong Duterte, pati na ang kanyang mga di umano'y alipores, lalo na't malapit umano ang dating Pangulo sa China. Sa ginanap na House hearing ng Quad Committee, kaugnay sa NGCP, ang kumpanyang namamahala sa kuryente at iba pang mahahalagang base dito sa ating bansa, hindi napigilang mangamba ng ilang kongresista dahil napaglaman na may mga Chinese businessmen na kasosyo ang naturang kumpanya. At base sa kanilang masusing investigasyon, napagalaman ang mga mahahalagang detalye na dapat na malaman ng sambayan ng Pilipino. Panuurin, pakinggang mabuti at kayo na ang bahalang humusga.
Most of the questions that I'd like to ask have already been asked by Deputy Speaker J.J. Suarez. But just following the issues that he raised on the very concerning and very alarming, there seems to be a control by the Chinese nationals in the operation of the NGCP. Kaya earlier, I was asking if the shareholders agreement was submitted to the committee, because most of my questions that I'd like to propound are based on the information that is stipulated in that agreement. However, in the absence of that, I'd like to pursue the issue where in this corporation there seems to be total and full control of the Chinese nationals. Tanong ko lang sa NGCP, no? Sa maraming pagkakataon, kapag tinatanong who controls, operates, and manage the NGCP, ang lagi pong sagot ay Pilipino. Tama po ba yan?
Tama po, Your Honor.
Okay. So, pinaninindigan ninyo na ang merong management, control, and nag-ooperate ay Filipino.
Opo, Your Honor.
So, ang ibig sabihin po ba nito na ang Pilipino ay siya yung may desisyon, yung kumbaga huling pa siya doon sa mga decisions that the NGCP makes?
Opo, Your Honor.
Okay. So, Pilipino lahat yan.
Opo, Your Honor.
Okay, kasi kanina nabanggit ni Congressman Suarez na dun sa desisyon sa pagbili ng lupa, paghingi ng approval, ang nagre-rekomenda ay ang isang Chinese national. No? So, that's the reason why I said earlier, this is very concerning and alarming. Bakit sila yung nagdidesisyon? Di ba dapat Pilipino ang nagdidesisyon dyan? But sabi nga, gaya nga ng sinabi mo, Pilipino ito, no? Doon sa mga nakaraang hearing, lagi po natin ini-emphasize that Filipino control in the transmission network ng Pilipinas ay napakahalaga because marami pong isyong nakaakibat dito. At ang pinaka-importanting issue dito ay yung national security. Tama po ba? Do you agree with me?
I agree, Your Honor.
So you agree with this representation that full control, full management of the transmission, national transmission, must be in the hands of patriotic Filipinos.
Nag-agree po ako, Your Honor.
Nag-agree kayo dyan. Sige. So, matanong ko lang, ano ba sa inyong pananaw ang relasyon ng transmission network sa national security, if I may be educated, Mr. Chair? Sa inyong pananaw, sa NGCP, anong relasyon nito? Anong kahalagahan?
Napakahalaga po, Your Honor. Dahil katulad nga po sa mga nakakaraang House Committee on Energy hearing, si Kong Dagook talagang sinasabi niya parang basic necessity na natin ng power. Dati food, tubig, bahay, pero ngayon power. Kaya po sumasangayon ako na napakahalaga ng transmission network po.
So, salamat at isa kang ring patriotic Filipino na sumasang-ayon na itong transmission network ng ating bansa ay dapat nasa ilalim ng kamay ng mga Pilipino. Sa present situation and setup ng NGCP, masasabi mo ba na ang transmission network ng Pilipinas under the control and management of NGCP ay nasa ilalim ng kamay ng mga Pilipino?
Walang pagsusubali, Your Honor. Sumasang-ayon ako na nasa kamay ng mga Filipino.
And I presume, Mr. Chair, that that's the same opinion shared by your colleagues in the NGCP. Tama po ba? Attorney, all of you from the NGCP.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, maraming salamat dahil napakahalaga nga po nitong transmission network natin, no? At isa doon sa function na kung saan ay bago gumawa ng project, bago bumili ng lupa, o anumang desisyon na gagawin ng management ng NGCP, meron po kayong kinreate o merong nakikreate na sinasabi niyong working group. Is that correct?
Your Honor, yun nga po yung hindi masyadong maliwanag sa akin. That's a matter that's not clear to me when si Congressman Luistro was the one asking question because working group, meron po kami mga TWGs. Kunyari, nung nag-bar exams, may TWG kami. Pag may election, may TWG na nag-aano na talagang hindi mag-brown out sa mga importanteng pagkakataon na yon. Hindi po ako familiar, Your Honor, sa working group. Hindi po ako familiar, Your Honor. We have, Your Honor, like departments, roadie right of way department. Meron po kaming mga ganun, Your Honor. working group, wala po. Mula nang pumasok ako ng NGCP, TWG.
There's no
but
such
working
thing
group,
as
hindi.
working group.
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
There's no such thing as the working group. Is that what
Since-
you're saying?
Yes, since I
Okay.
joined, Mr. Chair,
Okay.
hindi ako familiar sa
When did you join the NGC?
2019, Your Honor.
But more or less you have reviewed or perhaps you have been informed as to the contracts entered into
Yes, Your
prior
Honor.
to your appointment, correct?
Yes, Your Honor. I'm
Halimbawa po,
with the
yung-
OGC, Your Honor.
Halimbawa po, yung 2014, yung nagkaroon ng bid para sa natitirang aspeto ng Aurora Polanco, yung transmission line project, tama? You're familiar with that?
If your document provides so, Your Honor.
Yes, kasi nga, napakaalaga because this is the information that was shared with us wherein this working group plays a very vital and important role. Ba't ko nasabi ito, Mr. Chair, is that nung pong nagkaroon ng isang project, itong sinasabing Aurora Polanco 138 kV transmission line project, nagpabid ho kayo. But that is a normal procedure, correct?
Opo, competitive bidding before awarding any project.
Okay, so when you open for bids, do you qualify those that will submit their bids?
Yes, the bidders, Your Honor, are qualified. Yeah.
Okay, so I am also sure and certain that in this particular project which I mentioned, is that may nag-submit na mga bids sa inyo. And doon sa mga nag-submit ng bids, karamihan po ay Chinese-owned companies. Are you aware of that?
Pagpaumanhin po, Your Honor, I'm not aware dyan sa particular po na minimension nyo.
Or perhaps it may help us to determine whether these companies are really those that submitted their bids in this particular project. Can we ask the Secretariat to show the slide of these Chinese companies who joined the Aurora Polanco transmission line project? Tatlongput-anim po ang mga kumpanyang nag-submit ng kanilang bids dito. At lumalabas dito sa mga bid na ito ay mahigit kalahati ho ay puro China o Chinese-owned bidders o Chinese-owned companies. Now, bakit ko sinasabi to, no, na ano bang importansya, no? Okay lang naman ho siguro kung mag-bid ang isang Chinese company kung wala hong bidder mula sa Pilipinas. Do you agree?
Opo.
Okay. So, dun ho sa mga bids, sino ho nag-evaluate ng bids? Sino nagsasabing mananalo ito, matatalo ito, hindi nagka-qualify ito? Sino ho yan?
Meron po kaming department, Your Honor, at yung most advantageous bid, yun po yung mako-consider for an award, Mr. Chair.
Can you repeat that, please?
Meron po kaming department that who evaluates kung ang most advantageous bid, Your Honor, sa kanya po ma-award yung project, Your Honor.
Base sa amin kasing information, ang nag-evaluate o yung membro ng evaluation, bid evaluation, nag-submit ng bid evaluation report on this particular project ay si Mr. Yuan Mingjun at si Mr. Chen Changwei. You're familiar with those names?
I am not familiar with those names, Your Honor.
Yes, I agree because you were not there yet. No, this was 2014 project. So for those who were already there in 2014, you're familiar with these names.
Your Honor, I have been in NGCP since 2011 but I'm not familiar with those names.
So, yung hindi ho totoo na meron pong nag-evaluate na by the name of Mr. Yuan Mingjun at Chen Chingwai.
Again, as I repeat, Your Honor, I'm not familiar of those names. But as mentioned by Attorney Malyari, we have a department which evaluates the bid submitted by different bidders and recommend the award with the most advantageous bid, Your Honor.
Based on the documents that we have, it seems that the approval, the evaluation of all these bids are done by these two Chinese nationals. Which again, I would like to raise this point that this is quite alarming and concerning. Kanina, sinabi natin yung pagbili ng lupa, Chinese ang nagdidesisyon. Yung pag-implement ng project, Chinese ang nagdidesisyon. So, again, can we ask the Secretariat to please flash on the screen
Which particular document do you want
The-
flashed?
I think yan
Okay.
yun. These are
Thank you
the
very much.
bidders, no? These are the bidders doon sa project which I specified, no? And in the next slide, it will show, can you show the next slide? So, majority po ng mga kumpanyang ito ay China-owned corporations. So, the next slide, please, Secretariat. Kanina ho kasi na-raise na po ito ni Congressman Suarez. And when he raised this issue of Chinese nationals being involved in the decision-making of the NGCP, did not just raise eyebrows, so to speak, but also, ito ay isang national security vulnerability sa tingin ko na yung mga importanteng desisyon ng NGCP ay nasa kamay ng mga dayuhan. So, yung next slide will show what I was mentioning earlier, yung sinasabing working group. No? Wherein itong si Mr. Yuan Mingjun at saka si Cheng Changwei, the chairman and the alternate chairman of the working group, no, are the ones deciding. So, ayan, yung name na uyang, ayan, that's July 11, 2014, the so-called working group, the chairman of that is Yuan Mingjun, and the alternate chairman is Chen Changwei. So, as you said earlier, you're not familiar with this document, but perhaps ma'am, maybe you're familiar with this since you were there already in 2011.
Your Honor, I'm not familiar with this document.
So, you're not familiar with that. So, dalawang bagay lang ito. Yung research namin at yung base sa dokumentong sinasubmit nyo sa amin ay yun mga information that we'd like to be clarified on. That's why we ask these questions to you. Now, earlier, tinanong natin yung systems gaya ninyo kung ano yung procedure, no, para i-shut off, i-turn on or i-turn it off yung buong power system. At sabi niya, ang in charge lang doon ay yung duty manager. If I remember it correctly, there's just one person or maybe 2 or 3 of them who are in control of the shutting down or the turning on of the system. To me, And I'm sure my colleagues will share my apprehension na nakakatakot ito. Nakakatakot ito. And this is, again, something that we should really correct and we should look into, Mr. Chair. Now, other issues that were raised earlier by Kong Dan Fernandez were quite alarming too, no? Especially dun sa violation sa Section 8. But listening to the NGCP, definitely the first reaction is to deny, no? And to, short of saying, disagreeing with the observation of Congressman Dan Fernandez. And we respect that. It's just that we're all here para ayusin itong sistemang ito at hindi ito hindi mangyari yung kinakatakutan natin na maaari at posibleng mangyari, considering that we have now an issue with China in the West Philippine Sea. I cannot imagine utility companies being managed and operated by, quote-unquote, the enemy. I'm sure you wouldn't want to sleep with your enemy. And majority ng ating mga kababayan na nakikinig ngayon ay nagtatanong, totoo ba na kapag halimbawa nagkaroon tayo ng alitan sa ating kapitbahay na China, isang pindot lang ba nila, mawawala na ang power sa atin? That needs to be answered. The Filipino people must be informed. They need to know kung ito ay posibleng mangyari. Pero sa sagot kanina, parang posible. Parang posible. Unless you have a better reply to that question, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, nandun ako sa likod nung kausap niyo si aming Mr. Clark Agustin. Yung scenario niyo po kasi na bigay sa kanya is si terorista na sa kwarto na. But ang ano po is, bago siguro nakarating si terorista doon, kasi po yung control center namin are physically secured. And insofar as yung mga tao na mag-on at mag-off ng mga equipment, there are switching procedures which includes validation between control and substation. So, sa hypothetical scenario, it appears na hypothetically it can be done, pero sa tunay na buhay, Mr. Chair, may kalabuan.
So, yan ay ginagarantiyan nyo sa ating mga kababayan.
Opo.
So, hindi pwede na pakialaman ng dayuhan ang control sa ating elektrisidad o power dito sa ating bansa.
Opo.
Sigurado kayo dyan?
Opo.
Okay, sige. I will not belabor that point anymore, Mr. Chair, but to give more time to my colleagues here that would like to propound questions, I am yielding the balance of my 38 seconds in my interpellation, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very much, the Honorable Ace Barbers. The Honorable Pernix Junicio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to everyone. Sino po ulit yung mga representative natin sa NGCP? Parang tatlo po.
Meron po kami
Pero yung nakaupo po, tatlo.
tatlo po.
Ibig sabihin, kayo po yung nakaupo, kayo po yung may kaalaman. Mostly with regards to the query of the members of the committee. Tama po ba?
Opo. Hanggang sa kaya ng aming abilidad.
Don't worry, ma'am. Ako naman. No, mahirap po kasi yung tanong ko eh. Ma'am, ano pong first nickname niyo, ma'am?
Pangalan ko po, Attorney Lali Malyari.
Attorney Lani, ma'am. Saan po ang probinsya niyo?
Batangas po.
Batanggenya po kayo?
Yes po.
Pilipino po kayo?
100%.
Of course, it goes to, without saying. Of course, all the representatives from NGCP are all Filipinos here. Agreed?
Opo.
Opo. No, kasi actually, most of the queries and questions of the members have been asked by the members who asked questions earlier. Ako lang kasi na bagabag ng kaunti doon sa mga ibang informations, ma'am, na narinig ko, attorney. For example, ano ba yung nabanggit kanina, yung chairman ba? Sino po ulit ba yung chairman?
Based on the 2024 GIS ng NGCP po, the chairman is Mr. Zhu Guangzhou. Ang nationality niya po na naka-indicate dito sa GIS ay Chinese.
Ma'am, sinagot nyo na, tinatanong mo pa lang yun. But thank you, ma'am, for answering agad. Pero, bakit po kaya Chinese yung naging chairman sa tingin nyo, ma'am?
Katulad po ng sagot ko kanina, Mr. Chair, how the Board of Directors operate, sila po yung nakakaalam. At saka po, pinasasubmit na rin po ni Congressman Suarez yung minutes of the meeting ng election.
Yes, ma'am. Opo. Kasi all the answers have been technical. I'm trying to talk to you as representatives of NGCP on a more, let's say, personal yung opinion po ninyo. Matagal na rin po kayo sa NGCP, 2019, tama po ba, ma'am?
2019, Mr. Chair.
Ma'am, kayo po, since when po kayo nasa NGCP?
Since 2011.
2011. So, more than a decade. Sir, kayo po,
2009 po.
2009. Mas antigo si Sir sa inyo. Pareho. No, yung ano lang kasi sa akin, hindi ba kayo, ako kasi nung first time I've heard dun sa sinabi na yung chairman natin, although yes, ipapass nyo sa committee yung mga minutes of the board, hindi ba kayo na babagabag na, sa sarili niyo pong opinion na I'm sure you are lawyers na meron din kayong sariling opinion. Nababagabag po ba kayo o hindi naman po?
Mr. Chair, sa pagkakaalam ko po, insofar as our board of directors is composed and how they proceed with their order of business, ang chairman po ng board only presides. So, para pong preside. So, kung bagabag dahil
Chinese.
dahil meron siyang pwedeng ma-exercise na compulsion, kahit sa akin, sir, hindi po. Kasi it's outside. It's ultra-virus na po yung gagawin niya kung i-compel niya ako to do anything, Mr. Chair.
So, in your opinion, attorney, yung chairman, walang influence. Nagpe-preside lang siya. That is your opinion.
That's my opinion, and as they are constituted, Mr. Chair.
Yes, I understand that. That's the technical. Yeah. But the reality is, yung chairman, alam naman nating lahat, hindi lang naman hanggang sa preside. Yun naman ang realidad. Pero I won't stay with that. Ang nag-aalala lang ako si ma'am, yung mga narinig kong information, yung control over management, yung extent of influence in decision-making ng operations, medyo nakaka-worry. Yung State Grid International Development Limited, or SGID, tama po ba? Ito yung may 40% ownership, ma'am?
Opo, State Grid International Development Limited, Hong Kong, SAR. Buong pangalan po.
Sino po ba tong SGID na to, ma'am?
Katulad po ng nabanggit ko kanina,
Yes, ma'am.
NGCP po kami. Technically, ito pong mga korporasyon na to ay separate from us. So, ako po walang personal knowledge insofar as sino nagko-compose kay State Grid International Development Limited.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I really hope that the committee, sana lumabas po lahat itong mga katanungan ng mga members at control over technical operations. Ma'am, ano po ba yung CTO, yung Chief Technical Officer Ano po ba ang tungkulin nun?
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Yung Chief Technical Officer po, under sa kanya yung 4 na grupo, yung System Operations, Planning and Engineering, Operation and Maintenance, and Technical Management Department.
Yung Chief Technical Officer natin, Pilipino naman po.
Tama po, Filipino po.
Ako lang, sa mga narinig ko po, to give way to my other colleagues, nakakabagabag talaga yung mga narinig ko na, yung influence ng bansa ng China sa atin. So, Mr. Chair, that I really hope that the committee will find out to the bottom of things, the queries of each members, and sana itama natin yung dapat itama, na yung mga bagay na dapat in control ang mga Pilipino, dapat fully controlled by Filipino citizens, patriots. Just one quick manifestation, Mr. Chair, na I'm in full support of the investigation of this committee, and in the end, wala naman pong magmamalasakit sa ating mga Pilipino, kundi tayo rin kapwa mga Pilipino. Maraming salamat, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, the Honorable Ernix Janicio of the City of Manila. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Rog. Yes, Honorable Rog, and then the Honorable Stella Kimbo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, before I begin my interpellation, I'd just like to have a short manifestation. Listening to the proceedings earlier, and of course, we can't help but understand that some of our colleagues here have shared their elation and their gratitude to the NGCP for having connected their various constituencies to the grid. However, just to give it the proper context, because I, for one, this representation was one of the members of this committee who voted yes to the conducting of this motu proprio inquiry, I think we have to frame it in the proper context po, no? I don't think, not to sound ungrateful, but I don't think we should be happy when a franchisee is just doing its job po, no? And doing its job in a belated manner. I heard the statement earlier that better late than never. However, I think the Filipino people deserve better. We've talked about it. It was already mentioned earlier. In fact, we've heard the expert opinions that the 5-year delay actually caused an increase in price, which our constituents could have enjoyed earlier. Yes, we're thankful that eventually they were connected to the grid. However, there is a plan that has been afforded to them. And in fact, the ERC and the DOE have been bending themselves over backwards just to accommodate them po, no? And I think the problems and issues are very glaring. So if there's any question as to the direction of this inquiry, I, for one, would throw my support behind it. Because as the way that we've seen it, before we even started this inquiry, through the news articles and some of the privileged speeches of some of the congressmen, we've already heard some of the issues. Not to mention, we have these I'm not really sure it will be right thing to say, no. Perhaps it will be preempting po, no, because a lot of these things are premised on documents which the NGCP have yet submitted to us. But there are allegations po, no, that their profits far exceed those that they are willing to spend to reinvest in our infrastructure. We're talking about the runaway cost in which they are passing it on towards us, the consumers. We also have issues of ownership, not only in questioning the nationalities involved and whether this respects the 60-40 rule that would be required of a public utility, but also of those that are in relation to the provisions of the franchise. Most glaring that we've been discussing today would be Section 8 po, no, in the dispersal of ownership. So in the face of all of these issues, I think it would not be wise to attack this issue with a sense of gratitude po, no. I don't think we should be thankful for the services that have been rendered when the rendered service was done poorly. And I think we should exact accountability, and that's what this inquiry is all about po, no. But with that said, Mr. Chair, I'd like to proceed now with my interpellation. And before I begin questioning NGCP, just most of the queries have been asked earlier, and a lot of my questions would actually hinge on documents that were already asked. But I believe just some few points on the dispersal of ownership, and I'd like to, before beginning with NGCP, I'd like to ask perhaps the ERC chair, Di Malata, if I may, just to briefly summarize. I beg the indulgence of everyone here if these questions were already asked. We were going back and forth po kasi may hearing, may session rin po kanina. But Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, from our understanding, I understand that you would be speaking on behalf of the ERC, and that the ERC has already made rulings previously. Whether or not those were wise, we see in as we go along with the line of questioning. However, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair of the ERC, yung ating dispersal of ownership, the basic concept of Section 8, what is the reasoning for this? I understand this would be under the wisdom of the previous Congress, but to give us to shed some light at least on the viewpoint of the executive, what is the reason for having a dispersal of ownership?
Mr. Chair, with your permission, I think the legislative intent, not just for the RA 9511 for NGCP, but for franchises that include, most of our franchises have include that obligation to disperse ownership. And the basic reasoning is that most of franchise holders are monopolies. So they have exclusive, in a way, exclusive rights to certain services, to certain geographical areas. So the intent is to allow the public to have some participation in that monopoly and to realize some gains also from the activities and the revenues of that monopoly, because it has no competition for that end. So that is in general the reasoning behind certain similar provisions. But as to this particular legislation, I think NGCP was asked about this, and I think it's wise if we check the deliberations of Congress at the time to get the specific requirement for this. But I don't think it will deviate significantly from the general principle behind the similar provisions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chair, just wanted to double check lang po, because I would agree and tend to agree, because this is not the first time we've dealt with such provision under the Committee on Legislative Franchises, actually, and this is not limited only to when we're talking about yung distribution utilities or the like. Actually, even in the field of telecommunications, in the field of media, we also have this dispersal of ownership. And I just wanted to make sure that at least in the field of the DOE, it would be the same, because the way that I see it, and I'm not sure if the committee shares this sentiment, but I believe that it's twofold po, no? One is that primarily it affords the public to participate and gain economic benefits, that is to benefit from the fruits of this monopoly, whether that be through dividends or whatever manner of which that could be compensated for their investment. But second and most important is a check and balance through ownership, through equity po, no? So the equity portion is very important. And would that be a fair statement, Madam Chair? I don't want to put answers in your mouth po, no? Would that be a fair statement that the dispersal of ownership also talks of equity and control of a corporation?
That's correct, Mr. Chair, because the public utilities, there is a requirement in the Constitution to observe certain Filipino ownership requirements. So that's also part of the parameters or safeguards that are put in the law.
So generally, Mr. Chair, when we are going to interpret these provisions of the franchise, it would be guided by those principles po, no? That generally, the interpretation of any provisions should be in support of public participation and economic gain that the public may get out of it, and then public participation and ownership, equity po, no? Thank you for clarifying that. So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to now direct my questions to the NGCP. And I believe the current, not the spokesperson, but the representative is... Mr. Chair, if I may yield to...
Mr. Chair, if you allow, can I show a picture of the structure of the ownership, Mr. Chair?
Yes, please, by all means.
It's with the Secretariat already.
Okay, Secretariat, please present the structure.
Yung isang picture lang. Because the objective was to disperse the ownership, ano. But with the structure, although ang caveat lang dito is we are still awaiting for documents from the corporations that are like holding corporations. In the structure kasi ng ownership nila, Mr. Chair, yes, the 40% is owned by State Grid. And then there's the 60%. Both 60%, if you divide it into half, that's Monte Oro, and the other half would be Calaca High Power Corporation. But if you go up, Mr. Chair, there's basically like on the 60%, medyo there are basically two people that are controlling NGCP, Mr. Chair. Wala, hindi mo pa. Ayan, Mr. Chair. It's too small, ano? We lifted this from the dissenting opinion in this is a public document already. So pag inakyat mo siya, exactly what is the statement? Principally held by two persons lang siya, Mr. Chair. But yes, that is it depends on the submissions of NGCP on the ownership of the companies that are holding the shares, Mr. Chair.
Raj?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, if we may ask the COMSEC to keep that on screen, because coincidentally, I was going to be talking about that very opinion, because as a public record, I actually also ran into that dissenting opinion. And I would like to ask now the NGCP. Maybe ask Attorney Malyari po, no? So I understand that earlier, if you could, again, as I said, if you could bear with us po, no? We weren't here this whole time. We had other hearings, we were in session. Naitanong na po ito ni Chair Dan Fernandez po, no? You made mention of a share swap agreement, is that correct?
Mr. Chair, the share swap agreement has always been in the questions of Congressman Dan Fernandez, but not from me, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So, so I'll take the questioning from the start na lang po, no?
Okay.
So under Section 8, you have dispersal of ownership requirement po, no? And based on some of the filings that you've had with the ERC, I'm not sure if this was a case or whatever the main, whatever this was a dissenting opinion to, you were actually seeking for extension po for the compliance with Section 8. Is that correct, Attorney Malyari?
Up, Mr. Chair.
And the extension was made in reference to the requirement that you would have your shares directly offered to the public through an IPO, the 20%. Is that correct, Mr. Chair?
Yun po, Mr. Chair.
And I believe that this was actually run down. I thought this was taken up by Congressman Dan Fernandez, because I heard Chair Dan going through the specific dates of which you had motion for reconsideration, etc., etc. So, tama naman po, we were still talking about the IPO. But somewhere along the line, the NGCP opted to comply with Section 8, allegedly, through another mode. Is that correct, Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And that other mode would be what mode po kaya, Attorney Malyari?
The second mode provided under Section 8 of RA 9511.
And may we be enlightened as to what the alleged second mode would be?
I'll read, Mr. Chair. So, Section 8, dispersal of ownership under RA 9511, the grantee shall list subject to the requirements of the SEC and the PSE, and make public offering of the shares representing at least 20% of its outstanding capital stock or a higher percentage that may be hereafter be provided by law within 10 years from the commencement of its operations. Then there's the second, Mr. Chair, there's the second mode, provided that the listing in the PSE of any company which directly or indirectly owns or controls at least 30% of the outstanding shares of stock of the grantee shall be considered full compliance of this listing requirement.
And Mr. Chair, you are of the opinion that this was complied with by the NGCP?
Mr. Chair, yes, as confirmed in the ERC decision dated May.
So which would be the company po which directly or indirectly owns or controls at least 30%?
The one that was listed, Mr. Chair. Bale po, Synergy Grid, Mr. Chair.
Synergy Grid. is the supposed company by which that you have complied with Section 8. And as to the ownership
route,
of
Mr. Chair.
Synergy Grid, are we not aware? No.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
But, Mr. Chair, I believe that the dissenting opinion that was flashed earlier, if we may ask the committee secretary to flash it once again, actually already divulged the owners, and I believe this is a public record. Was this not based on what the NGCP submitted to the ERC for their decision?
May I see, Mr. Chair?
ERC case number 2018-014 MC, is this not in relation to the extension or at least to the approval of your compliance with Section 8?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
So what could be the basis of this figure 1, which is of public record?
If I have to hazard a guess, Mr. Chair, most likely the prospectus for which the follow-on offering of Synergy Grid and Development Philippines was offered, Mr. Chair.
So the prospectus by Synergy, so SGP, no? If you allow, we'll just call it SGP for simplicity. So are you telling us now po that the NGCP would have no clue as to the IPO or whatever listing requirement was required out of SGP? That's what you're telling us now po. Kasi when I'm asking you questions about this organizational chart, you're telling us po wala po kayong kinalaman sa share swap agreement. Are you categorically denying knowledge of a share swap agreement?
Hindi po ako aware mismo. I haven't seen
Okay.
that share swap agreement. But perhaps there was a share swap agreement in order to come up with this corporate structure, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So perhaps, but this is a requirement under Section 8 of your franchise. Yet the NGCP has no knowledge of the proceedings in which SGP undertook to comply for NGCP's requirement?
Mr. Chair, when there was, personally, Mr. Chair, during the transaction of the follow-on offering, may mga dokumento po na pinapaprepare sa amin dahil ultimately yung ilalim kasi niyan si NGCP. Siya yung operating company, Mr. Chair, because sa taas mga holding companies. So may mga dokumento na pinapaprepare sa amin. So insofar as your question na wala ba ako, kunyari, personally, kaalam-alam doon sa follow-on offering, meron naman, Mr. Chair, but not the entire picture.
Okay.
Insofar as the documents that I am asked to prepare, Mr. Chair.
I hope you'd bear with us po. No? Can we have the chart flashed again po, please, Committee Secretariat? So, as far as we're looking at this, to what extent would you admit to having knowledge of po? To what level? Do you admit knowing that Monte Oro Grid Resource Corp owned 30% plus 1 share?
Apo.
To that extent that you could agree. Do you admit that State Grid International Development Limited owns 40% at that time?
Opo, kasi
Okay.
lahat po yan are
Direct.
even right now reflected in the 2024 GIS.
Also including Calaca High Power Corporation?
Yes, po.
Yes. Now, the second level, One Taipan Holding Inc., would you admit to having knowledge of its participation in direct ownership of National Grid Corporation of the Philippines?
Nakita ko na nga po, Mr. Chair, itong corporate structure na to when I was asked to work on some documents that are needed from NGCP. But yung in-depth, pasensyahan nyo na po, Mr. Chair.
That would be fine, Mr. Chair. I don't need in-depth naman po. I just wanted confirmation that this is not new to the NGCP. I understand that there are questions that you would answer that you don't have personal knowledge, but I hope you understand we invite you here as resource persons, assuming that there will be some kind of institutional knowledge po, no, of the things that we would be asking of you. So I understand that you would refuse to answer based on personal knowledge, but at least the admission that you have come across documents in which you are involved in this would be sufficient. So you agree, to what extent po you've seen this in the documentations that NGCP prepared for SGP when they were preparing the prospectus for their IPO? You've seen documents all the way to the top po, no? That Henry C. Jr. owns 49.93% of Synergy Grid and Development Philippines?
Wala pa akong nakita na any ownership document insofar as that. Only, Mr. Chair, as the structure is shown. Yan lang, Mr. Chair.
So as the structure is shown?
Yes, Mr.
And these are documents that came from SGDP?
I would most likely,
Most
Mr.
likely
Chair.
po, no? Because they would prepare the prospectus and they
Yes,
would
Mr.
ask for
Chair.
your, go ahead, because this is concerning your obligations under the franchise po, no?
Mr.
So
Chair,
you,
yes, Mr. Chair.
NGCP is aware of this structure. So we just are awaiting confirmation na lang po, no? Based on the ownership documents. So it's not new to the NGCP that we have the first layer of ownership, which is what is declared in the GIS. Then you have a second layer of ownership, which are holdings corporations, which are supposedly the means through which SGDP has indirect ownership of the National Grid Corp. However, SGDP's ownership of these two holdings is shared with private persons. And these private persons, namely Henry C. Jr. and Robert Coyuto Jr., each own, oh sorry, in the case of Pacifica, it's actually with Alameda Energy. So we'll have to look into that. But that's the structure by which SGDP exercises control and ownership for NGCP. However, Mr. Chair, at the time that this prospectus was prepared and that they were already preparing for the supposed shift po, no? Because originally it was supposed to be an IPO of NGCP itself. And then it shifted towards this supposed second mode. Was there any reason that the NGCP opted for this second mode? Any particular event or incident that caused them to suddenly change? Because I would imagine it would take a lot of preparation time. If you were given 10 years to prepare for the Section 8, I don't think you thought of Section 8 on the 10th year. So for over 10 years, you've been preparing for an IPO. Only at the last minute, after 2 extensions, I believe, you decide to opt for the, well, you won't admit it now, the share swap agreement, pero that's basically the method of which you have tried to comply with Section 8. So ano po kaya yung number one reason? Are you privy, perhaps, to the board meeting in which this was discussed?
Mr. Chair, I am not privy. But can I venture an opinion, Mr. Chair, based on my previous life? Because, Mr. Chair, previously I was in the Philippine Stock Exchange. And previously also I was involved in companies that do intend to list in the stock exchange. Mr. Chair, sa lahat talaga, every meeting doon, medyo hindi advisable ng isang operating company ang mag-list ng kanyang stock. Dahil pa, Mr. Chair, dahil nga operating company, sobrang magalaw. Konting ano lang dyan, for instance, may blackout, may mag-halt trading po siya. So, that's my guess, Mr. Chair. But kung ano talaga yung nangyari dito, hindi po ako privy for the reason.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Madam. Thank you, Attorney Malyari. Mr. Chair, may I ask the chairperson of the ERC, would that be, in your opinion, a sufficient answer? Because I understand for an operating corporation, that would go for a lot of other corporations too. And at any time, we still have Section 8 and it's being complied directly by these franchise holders. So would that be a sufficient answer, Madam Chair?
Mr. Chair, maybe we'll just base it on our experience. For example, one of the longest listed utility is Meralco. Meralco is an operating company, one of the longest running private distribution utilities in the country. So that's one. We also have, I think it was mentioned earlier, telcos that are directly listed. PLDT, for example, is directly listed also. So I'm not sure about the basis, but I'm certain that NGCP had their own reasons for shifting. I just don't know, and I think Attorney Malyari also was saying she was not familiar with the reason of the board. I would think this decision is something that's made by the board.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chair, and I agree, of course, NGCP has the reasons. But what we have to discover now is if those reasons are aligned with public interest. Now, if those reasons are to keep a control over who gets to participate in NGCP, then that would go against Section 8 po, no? And I think, of course, this is not something that they would be ready to answer now. But eventually, once the documents are made available, I think we will get to the bottom of it. But another telling aspect, siguro po, Mr. Chair, was the fact that the means by which they opted for this alleged second mode po, no? Yet, these shares are supposedly, maybe confirm, are these preferred shares? Or are they voting common shares? May we ask, Mr. Chair, Representative NGCP?
NGCP or Attorney Milyari?
Mr. Chair, sorry, no knowledge, Mr. Chair.
Would-
Sa buong yung pong sa buong proseso ng follow-on, hindi po ako familiar, Mr. Chair.
May I ask SEC the same question of the Honorable Rog Gutierrez? SEC.
Thank you,
please repeat your
NGCP.
question?
Okay, I'll repeat it for the benefit of the SEC. Would the SEC have any knowledge po, no, as to what kind of shares were listed by SGP? What kind of shares are owned by SGP in NGCP po, no? Were there any common shares, or are these all preferred non-voting shares?
I would just like to clarify SGP as in State Grid International Development.
Sorry, no. We're talking about because SGP owns shares of Monte Oro. Wait. Can we flash again about the chart, no? Here. So supposedly, SGDP would have indirect ownership of NGCP through the holdings One Taipan Holding and Pacifica Holdings. And Pacifica Holdings, One Taipan Holdings would indirectly own NGCP through Monte Oro and Calaca High Power Corporation. Now, can we have confirmation po, no, if the shares that are owned by SGDP in One Taipan and Pacifica, are they preferred shares or are they voting shares?
One Taipan. So we have to look at the GIS of One Taipan. I have here, wait, let me check. Based on our records, based on the GIS 2024 of One Taipan, Synergy Grid and Development Philippines Incorporated owns 86,430,000 common shares.
So they own common shares naman po.
Yes. Yes,
And
Mr. Chair.
for Pacifica 21 Holdings?
Oh, for Pacifica. For Pacifica 21 Holdings Inc., based on their 2024 GIS, it's the same, Mr. Chair. They also, Synergy Grid also holds common shares.
And we can presume naman po, no, kasi 100% ownership yung One Taipan in Monte Oro and Pacifica 21, these would be common shares naman po, no?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And for Monte Oro and Calaca, what is their percent ownership na common po sa NGCP? Do they own preferred shares in NGCP?
For NGCP, Monte Oro owns common shares. Also, what's the other one? Calaca High Power also owns common shares.
So all of the shares that they own are common
yes,
shares?
Mr. Chair. Based on our records, Mr. Chair, yes, common shares.
I request that those documents be furnished to the committee before you're leaving today.
Yes, we will furnish your
you.
body, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My follow-up question would be on the FOO, yung follow-on offering, but I understand the NGCP they would not be able to answer yung details ng FOO, tama po? So I think these are things that we'd have to ask na lang through documentation. So Mr. Chair, may we move? I don't know if this was already asked by Chair Dan earlier or any of our other colleagues, but may we request siguro po from NGCP that they provide us documentation, first and foremost on the share swap agreement, if that was not asked for earlier. Yung follow-on offering siguro po, we'll request that also. And Mr. Chair, if the body would be like-minded, siguro we have to invite representatives of SGTP mismo so that they can enlighten us as to this alleged second mode po, no?
Okay.
And
Take note of that.
thank you, Mr. Chair. Just short manifestation before I end. Given that we don't have documentation yet to answer, I still find it very hard to subscribe to the idea that this alleged second mode is a proper exercise po, no? the proper compliance with Section 8 because it seems to be very convoluted and it passes through a lot of hoops just to claim that there is an indirect ownership of SGDP. Because the way that we see it, if it was really to comply with, let's say, assuming that for some reason, it's very hard for an operating corporation to directly offer 20% of their shares to the public. The most straightforward way that they could comply with the second mode was to have a holdings company that would own 30%. Why did SGDP have to split its ownership into two corporations, namely one Taipan Holdings and Pacifica Holdings, of which they share ownership with single persons, Henry C. and Mr. Robert Coyuto? So why would the question, I guess, Mr. Chair, is what's with the corporate gymnastics po, no? When it could have been a simple direct ownership of 30% which they offer to the public. Now, when you look at it, in effect, without looking into the ownership documents that we're requesting, in effect, how much po talaga ang shareholdings ng public in NGCP? If this is to be believed, it says here other shareholders have only participated to the tune of 0.26%. Then whether or not they agreed, whether or not that second mode exists, the intent of the law is not being satisfied po, no? Because I don't think we could consider that in the twofold, the two factors that we were considering when we talk about Section 8, that is enjoying the economic benefits of ownership, and second, the exercising control through equity. So these are just some of the things that, although through the gymnastics they might claim that legally they are complied, but in effect, it doesn't seem to be the case. And I think that's why we are here now convened as this committee